everyone. Today's selection from my playlist is one that is actually a quite recent addition to it, and that is Dire Straits' Sultans of Swing. It was just a matter of weeks ago that I heard it for the first time, actually with a fellow musician and YouTuber, Christina from OK Christina. Even though it's fairly recent, it has certainly found a place on my playlist that I return to and listen to and enjoy. It's certainly different from some of the others that I have been talking about and sharing from my playlist. And so it's going to be kind of fun to look at why did this one find its place on my playlist? Because it's certainly not some epic, grand, passionate, dramatic, or otherwise deep musical piece, but it is special and it is beautiful. As I said in my first listen, it has an incredibly warm, comforting, gentle, easy vibe to it. And it's the kind of piece where, I don't very often put music on just to run in the background because I want to hear what I'm listening to. But this one I feel like is a really great mood setter, and it works incredibly well for me as music to just have in the background while I'm busy around the house doing things, and I can check in with it, pay attention to it, find it interesting and enjoyable, or I can just enjoy the mood that it sets without really paying close attention to it. And part of this, I think, has to do with a little bit of my personal background. And so I want to share a little story about me. Growing up, we had a family acquaintance who was an accomplished classical guitarist. I may have mentioned that on this channel once or twice before, but it hasn't come up very often. But this person would drop by from time to time to practice performing whatever program they were getting ready to present. So I grew up hearing the great guitar classics, Albéniz, Tárrega, Rodrigo, and Barrios in our living room. And to this day, I have a sort of special affection for Spanish-style classical guitar music, which actually, over time, developed into an enjoyment of Spanish-style classical piano music, because there are a lot of links between the two. Even though this particular piece, Sultans of Swing, is a fairly recent addition to my playlist, I have enjoyed listening to it on repeat. And I find it kind of funny because as much as I appreciate and admire Dylan's declamatory sung speech style, it's not something that I have ever found myself gravitating towards. And so I found it a bit odd that I was enjoying this song so much, which imitated that style. Well, truth be told, it's the guitar solos that are the real highlight for me. In this piece, every time it gets to one of its two solos, I just want to hear it and feel it and just let it flow through me. It is so beautifully melodic, also with a lot of classical flamenco overtones, which takes me back to my childhood exposure to classical guitar. I'd actually love it if these solos were longer. Each one, I think, could be developed into its own piece of music, and I'd be happy just listening to them on their own. I mean, if we just explore, well, the thing is, there's something special about guitar, which, as much as harp is a plucked instrument, it doesn't quite do the same thing, because you can pluck a guitar string and then move your fingers and get more pitches just gradually flowing out from that first pluck. It doesn't work that way on the harp, but still, I can't resist sitting down and trying some of these little figures that feel so comfortable even on the harp. For example, in the final solo, which starts something like this. Right? It doesn't sound anything like what you hear in Sultans of Swing, but those are the notes. And then this free-flowing. Isn't that lovely? A little bit later, it goes into this wonderful little arpeggiation. Isn't it lovely? And And so sweet and delicate. That is just a small sample of some of the classical, traveling through the classical tradition, the folk influences, the Spanish influences, the that I find in this piece, even though it's so clearly a blues rock style piece of music. The song itself, though, outside of the guitar solos, is sweet and conveys such warmth. As Christina and I were commenting in our first listen together, it's comfortable, it's comforting. There's this gentleness and easiness about it. Well, on that topic, maybe going back to the vocal delivery for a moment. As I said, as much as I hear it modeled after Dylan, to me, Knopfler's voice is much warmer and gentler and more friendly sounding. It doesn't put me on edge like, say, Dylan's delivery of The Hurricane, which is really the first musical cross-reference that I made when I heard this for the first time. I thought, that sounds like Dylan, the way he sings in some of his music. But here it feels gentler. But it's more than just Knopfler's voice. There is another huge element which plays such an important part in the overall vibe of this piece. And as I'm talking about all these different things, my childhood memories of guitar, my love of Spanish classical music, I'm coming down to this one thing, which, as I spent some time listening to this since I've heard it for the first time recently, as I've listened to it over and over, this has come out as, to me, probably one of the most significant elements of this piece that makes it what it is. And that is the harmonic progressions on which it is built. This is where I come back around to the guitar music I grew up listening to. A lot of those composers, those Spanish classical guitar composers, were heavily influenced by traditional Spanish folk music styles, like flamenco, which originated in a part of Spain called Andalusia. In fact, there's a chord sequence that has become so closely associated to this musical style, the flamenco style, that it's called the Andalusian cadence. Just listen to it for a minute. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't it warm and friendly and kind of almost melancholy in a way, but there's a comfort to it. Now, what if I extend this just a little bit? That starts to sound a little bit familiar, right? That is the classic Andalusian cadence. Why does it sound familiar? Probably because it is. Well, even though it's been dubbed the Andalusian cadence and that has become so identified. It's so identified with flamenco and the music that comes from Andalusia. It actually goes back even further than flamenco, all the way at least to Monteverdi in 1638. And I'm going to have Vlad insert a link to one of Monteverdi's pieces, which, if you listen, you'll hear the same chord progression and the same bass line clearly in that piece. Now, as I've been thinking about all of this, I have come up with so many different related topics and ideas I wanted to discuss, kind of more theory related. I've decided probably I'll branch out and do a couple of videos specific to this theory, but back to Sultans of Swing for now. Let's look at this chord progression a little bit more closely and try to understand why is it that it gives this warm, comforting feel to the piece. This is the key of D minor. That is our first chord. And it sets the minor tonality. But immediately the next thing we do is we step down to a major chord, which in a minor key, we find that from time to time, but not so often in the harmonies. Very often we tend to hear something more like, you hear that? And there's a whole different mood and dynamic which is heard between the two. But now, instead of having from D minor to this leading tone, we have it dropped a bit. It's the lowered seventh, it's the lowered leading tone. Or in jazz terms, the flat seven. And so we end up with this major chord here. Going to another major chord, walking down, and another major chord where we arrive, which happens to be the dominant, the 5. So what did we end up with here? We're in a minor key, but the only chord that we have that has the minor tonality is that key chord. Everything else is major. It keeps it from sounding too dark, too deeply moody. And also, because that our approach to the 5, the dominant, which I've talked a lot about the push and pull, the tug of war that happens between the dominant and the tonic, because we're moving downwards by way of the flat 7, then we end up with a much gentler, more peaceful arrival on that dominant chord. So we still have that dominant effect, but it's mellowed, it is softened, it is kind of snuck in there in a way that doesn't give us the same feeling of conflict and force that other common progressions usually do. And I think this is one of the big reasons that this song has such a comforting, warm, gentle personality. And it provides the backdrop for all the wonderful touches of warmth and humor that we find in the instrumentation, in the musical style, which is more blues rock. In Knopfler's voice, the warmth that he brings to that, this chord progression is the thing that sets us up and invites all of that to the table. Well, speaking of the instruments for a moment, I guess one of my favorite things about the instrumentation is how the bass and the drums are so tightly locked together. As I listen to this and think about it, I feel like they function as one unit. The bass enhances the drums, and the drums enhance the bass, but it doesn't feel like one helping the other. It feels like, if I were going to describe it in another way, I would say it feels like they are each saying the same thing, meaning they each speak with the same voice. The drums are the consonants, the bass are the vowels, but what is spoken is one voice, one statement, one musical contribution, just as I am speaking with one voice now and speaking both consonants and vowels in my words. But for me, the drums and the bass are so tightly linked, and it gives that they work together so well to give that sort of buoyant and rhythmic rock blues feel, which is the other significant feature of this piece, other than the historic links to the Andalusian cadence. Of course, it is also the rock and blues feel. And it feels so great. It feels so good. And it is so nicely presented. For me, it's all about how the drums and bass work together. But that's a bit unfair because then there's Knopfler's voice, which I said is so warm and comfortable. And as I said at the beginning, the guitar solos. So It's everything all together. But each one has its own specific role to play, which contributes to that. I also love the humor in this piece. It also is a kind of gentle humor, but it's there, both in the vocal delivery and in the lyrics themselves. I mean, even at the start, you get a shiver in the dark, it's raining in the park, but meantime. And I love the way he drops down and says, but meantime. And every once in a while, he makes this little comment, this little, not quite an interjection, but meantime, south of the river, you stop. And as I said in my first listen, this, what he does, the idea of south. I live in the southern United States. And so when it says south of the river, you stop and you hold everything. A band is blowing Dixie. Wait, Dixie? That is so strongly linked to the southern United States that it anchors it here for me. And then he plays with this, and over the course of the lyrics, he reveals that this is not at all about the southern United States. This is about something happening in England, in a certain part of England, and playing with the north-south ideas that come with north of England, south of England, north of the river, south of the river. It's playful, but it's subtle, and I like that. And then after he takes us on this kind of inner joke about south, down south, then we hear, way down south, London town, you check out Guitar George. He knows all the chords. Mind, it's strictly rhythm. He doesn't want to make the guitar cry or sing. And also these lyrics, I mean, okay, we could take them very face value, but one of the things I loved about is that one of my viewers said afterwards, or maybe even several said afterwards, that they think that this Guitar George is kind of a tongue-in-cheek reference to George Harrison of the Beatles. Perhaps it is. I don't know, but I kind of like that idea. And then, of course, this sort of joke about, okay, he's not an accomplished guitarist. He just does rhythm, and he doesn't care about making the guitar cry or sing. He doesn't want to do that. He just does strictly rhythm. And then it sets up his personality, his character, and his appearance a bit more. But another thing that I find so ironic is that this about he doesn't want to make it cry or sing is set in a piece of music and performed by a guitarist and a band whose, to my ears, is all about the guitar cries and it sings. It's so emotional. And so for them to be saying he doesn't want to make it cry or sing, I love it. I think it's brilliant humor. And of course, then the title of the song, Sultans of Swing. I mean, think about sultans, right? The Sultans of Swing. And only at this point is this band, this ragtag band, revealed as being called the Sultans of Swing. Again, it's so tongue-in-cheek, and this name only comes in the piece of music after he's set us up with the poverty of the band and the amateurishness of the band and the honky-tonk, everything like that. And then we are the Sultans of Swing. Suddenly, he takes us around a loop again. The crowd of young boys fooling around the corner, drunk, dressed in their best, and so on. The story goes. It's so colorful in such a subtle way. I love that. That's one of the things that I find appealing about this piece. If I'm stopping to pay attention to it as I'm listening, I become entertained by the lyrics. Deeply entertained. Humorously entertained. It's fun and it's sweet and it's gentle and there's no bitterness about it that I can find. And I love the fact that it handles these subjects in such a gentle, warm manner. So for me, this is on my playlist, not because of any grand heroism or deep exploration of human nature, but because of its wonderful gentleness and its perfectly easy, natural feel and its incredibly sweet sense of humor. As I said, it's a great one to simply turn on and let it set the mood. So a lovely addition to my playlist, which kind of helps balance out some of the more serious and dramatic pieces that are on it at the moment, as well as a great continued development of my exposure to Dire Straits and Mark Knopfler's gorgeous guitar playing. This is going to be on my playlist for a good long time, and I enjoy it. I'll see you soon.